recorded up to the cloud. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Thrash. Today I'll be presenting the first part of Module 1 in the Acceleration course on helping to start and develop acceleration for startups. Welcome to everybody. I wanted to just see if folks had had a chance to watch the videos last week. We'll give people a couple more minutes to come in. There's still a few people joining here. So before
sorry for interrupting. If you like, I can be temporarily a host. I can admit people while you're talking, and then make you host back again. Okay, it's up to you. Fine. But sure. If you need to share screen immediately, there is no point. So you can continue being a host. Just saying that there are people joining.
Yes, I know. I'm watching them.
Okay, so you can continue. And sorry for interrupting.
No problem. That was my partner, Argyri. He will be teaching other portions of this course, along with our third partner, Vivi, who you will meet, I believe, either next week or the week after. So once again, welcome everyone. And feel free to turn your cameras on for a moment if you'd like, those of you who can. Some of us are joining from home offices and others from workplaces. So don't be shy about showing us your living room couch or even your kitchen table. We've all been through a year or two of that, and photo bombing from pets and young children and everything else. So thankfully now we have technology that enables us to come together in these situations and be able to learn pretty much from anywhere. So I think the point is that the desire to learn is what's important, not the location that you're learning from. So okay, well, I think we've got some people in right now, and again, feel free to put messages into the chat. It looks like Natalia is sending a message here. Not a problem at all. However you feel more comfortable, have your video on or your video off. Some people learn better without the distraction of seeing themselves. I am going to keep most people muted, but please feel free to unmute yourself. Actually, I won't keep you muted. You can keep yourselves muted just for issues of background noise. Please feel free to ask questions, raise a hand. In whatever way you want to be involved. If something doesn't make sense to you, we can either stop and take questions in the middle, or we can wait and address them either after the break or at the end of the session. So just a little bit of housekeeping here. We are recording, and today's session will be 90 minutes long. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes in the middle so people kind of stretch and, refill your coffee cup or make a phone call if you need to, feed your kids, any of those things. And so we'll go until about 5:50. 5:45 to 5:50, take a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for the other half hour of the session. Tomorrow's session, which I will also be doing, is a much longer one. It's a 3-hour session. So we will be, starting again at 5 p.m. and finishing at 8 p.m. We'll probably have 2 10-minute breaks there. So we'll go for about 50 to 55 minutes, take a 10-minute break, another 50, 55 minutes, and then end the session. There is no homework for today or tomorrow. We're going to begin the homework on Thursday. Hopefully you all have had a chance to see the videos that were posted. That was kind of the preliminary assignment from last week. If you have not had a chance to watch them, I would suggest that you catch up on that this week. I think they're about 15 to 20 minutes, both of them, individually. And we're going to cover much of that material today and tomorrow, but it's supplemental, but it will help to kind of explain things and keep you or get you into the spirit and the content of this entire module. So I think we have everybody that was in the waiting room. I am going to take a quick screenshot here. If you guys will bear with me for just 1 second. Thank you. That's just for, like I said, for housekeeping. We can kind of show that we've got everybody on board from the beginning. So let me start sharing my screen here. Just a moment. Okay. So is everybody seeing this? Great. Okay. All right. As we mentioned, this is the training module on startup ecosystems and accelerators in the part of the Connect program that deals with early acceleration. Okay, this is, like I said, module 1. There will be 4 additional modules, and we will get more specific with each further module. So this is more of an introductory module that will touch on various aspects of the background of startup accelerators and startup ecosystems, and then move into issues like how to organize an acceleration program, how to finance one, and then various different issues in terms of running the program, such as the mentor relationship and the kinds of content that you want to cover in these programs. So first I wanted to see if anyone has any general questions or inquiries that they want to make before we start with the content. No questions so far? Okay, the second question to you all is if any of you have been involved either in an acceleration program or with startups in the past or currently.
Maybe not in the startups, but I had my private institution, my private company, just 3 years. Just
congratulations, good.
Thank you.
The 3 years, 3 years is sort of the litmus test for businesses, and typically
it was working profitable, but then was the war. It's 2008 years, and the economic crisis also, and I was emerging to close the activity.
Yeah, business and entrepreneurialism in general is not for the timid, shall we say. It is a very difficult life. It's a very rewarding life, but it's a difficult life as well. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about how some kinds of businesses can have a better chance to succeed. Definitely, we've all found in the last 2 years that often.
I'm sorry. You ask about, you told about the questions, and I want to ask you one question. You see, regarding the ecosystems. This is a terminology. When we are speaking with the students about the ecosystems, now and then they are thinking that we are speaking about the ecological systems.
Correct.
And I think that we need to change or make some explanations, because it's the entrepreneurial economic systems, not ecological systems.
Exactly. Well, you could not have given me a better way to begin this lecture, because as you very accurately said, an ecosystem typically refers to environmental.
Yeah.
Landscapes and so forth, right? And basically what it is, the term ecosystem is a way of describing all of the factors that fit together to allow something to flourish. And in order for it to flourish and grow, you need the basic structure, the substrate of the soil. That soil needs to be rich enough to support life. It needs to have the other elements coming in, such as water and sunlight and so forth, that are the fuel, let's say, for the plants to grow. And you need a healthy variety of different kinds of species of plants and things, if we're talking about an environmental ecosystem. And obviously animals as well, and insects, all the things that play a role in growing and continuing the diversity of that system. Well, business ecosystems are very, very similar. And business ecosystems need, just like environmental ecosystems, they need a healthy base in which to grow, a healthy climate in which to grow. They need inputs and fertilizers, shall we say, and they need diversity as well in order to thrive. We'll talk about different ways that metaphor actually fits startup ecosystems along the way. But I think also as you consider these different ways of looking at business ecosystems, you'll see a lot of the commonalities there. So most often we think of, when startup ecosystems began, we sort of think of the mother of all ecosystems as Silicon Valley, which is an area in Northern California, it's actually where I was born and raised, south of San Francisco, but it basically encompasses a fairly large part of the San Francisco Bay Area in Northern California. And the name Silicon Valley was first introduced in 1971, and it's a very interesting history as to how that came about. It was in the 1950s and 60s, there was a man named William Shockley. He was a physicist, very controversial person later in life, but he did quite a lot of groundbreaking work and actually invented the transistor. And the transistor forms the basis, the technological basis for almost all of our telecommunications equipment and much of our modern technology that we use today. And so his groundbreaking work to bring us the transistor was a very, very catalytic event and happening. That happened, that invention of the transistor and his work, he was working at a company called Bell Labs with several colleagues. And as I said, he was a rather difficult person, very controversial. After some time, he and his colleagues had a falling out, and his colleagues left the group, their working group that they were at together. And they moved on and started their own company. Now this group of colleagues had also invented what we call the semiconductor, right? The semiconductor is the basis of computers and mobile technology and so forth. And the semiconductor is built using silicon wafers, right? That's what the basic ingredient to semiconductors is silicon. So this work that was done to birth and then grow the production of silicon wafers and chips and the very first kind of semiconductor based technology was happening in the Bay Area at this time. And there were quite a few people who were involved either at Stanford University, which is a very well-known university in the Bay Area, or across town at the University of California at Berkeley, which is where I went to school, and several other smaller institutes and research areas around the Bay Area. So what happened was you had sort of a perfect storm of combination of human capital and research interest, along with intellectual backing to do the really hardcore scientific research into the technologies and the processes that were going to grow into computers and the development of computers and semiconductors and so forth. And at the same time, you also had money begin to come in that was financing these small companies that were being formed. And that money, that backing, which we now call venture capital, along with which it was very, very risky, of course, because these companies didn't have anything, they had no track record, they had no product yet, and so forth. The venture capital was financing the development of the company and the product as well, and the market, because there was no market for their technology yet. So you have a very interesting conjunction of both resources, intellectual capital and knowledge, and the desire to really push things forward, push the technology forward, push their discoveries forward, and apply it in the real world. They wanted to take this knowledge and this research out of the laboratory and actually apply it into products in the real world. And that kind of approach to things is what produced the idea or the organizing principle, let's say, of startup companies, right? Remember, startup companies are operating from zero. They don't have a product yet, typically. They typically are not certain that people will buy their product even when they do fix it. And they also often have very little capital to take them further. So they need support in different ways. They need support from outside funding sources, unless they have the money to give it to themselves, to give to the business themselves. And they need support in other ways from other people or other companies who either have had experience developing the technology that they're working with now, or have deep experience in the industry, so they understand the problems of this industry that the startup is trying to fix the problem with their product. Now, in 1976, people didn't necessarily see it quite that way. We have the benefit of hindsight, looking back about 45 years later, to really kind of understand how startups went from being just sort of an off phrase to a word that is recognized all over the world. And that kind of began to grow during the 1970s. Again, as I mentioned, this area of Silicon Valley started out with a few small technology companies, and those small technology companies grew. And the people who were the head researchers and the lead product developers and so forth left these companies as they grew to start their own companies. So they became like offshoots of these companies. Again, you start to see the logic of the word ecosystem, because as things are growing, they're leaving seeds around, and those seeds sprout into other companies. There are inputs coming in, more and more inputs, more and more fertilizer in the form of money, more and more support in the form of mentoring and so forth as it's growing along. There was a very big kind of jump in evolution. The first one we could say was with the semiconductors and the introduction of silicon wafers, right? A second very, very large and catalytic time period came during the late 1990s, when we have what we call the dot-com boom. Now, this is when the internet and internet technology had gained enough acceptance and enough maturity that it was starting to be used on a mass scale. And there were a lot of small companies that were suddenly taking advantage of the internet as a market for their products, and as a way to sell products, but also as a way to deliver solutions. Because as new businesses began to be on the internet more and more, they needed services that were internet based and so forth. Another thing that happened during this period, which was very, very important, was the kind of global growth of companies and company perceptions of themselves as startups, right? And this, of course, was made possible by technology and by the internet as well. One of the key aspects of a startup is that it's a company that is designed to grow not just a little bit by 10% or 20% or 50%. It's a company that's designed to grow in scale. And by that, we mean both grow the company in terms of the employees and the output of the company, but also the customers of that company and how many products are sold and how many people are served by their solution. So rather than saying we want to go from 1 customer to 100 customers, we look at it in terms of multiples of 10, right? So we want to go from 1 customer to 10,000 customers. We want to go from 10,000 customers to 10 million customers and so forth. That's what we mean by operating at scale. And with the exception perhaps of the financial industry, let's say, most companies that operate at scale have some form of a basis in technology. They have a technological aspect to their product, because the way that you're going to get that product into the hands of many, many people all around the globe is through technology, and through especially internet-based technology. Now, the startup boom that took place in the late 1990s saw a great deal of growth. There were small companies popping up all over the place. And it also saw a great deal, so there was a great deal of growth in production, but there was also a great deal of growth in funding. And that was really when venture capital and the whole venture capital based startup system really, really took hold as a model. Now, unfortunately, it also pointed out some of the weaknesses in this kind of a model, where you're using a great deal of money on very, very risky ventures. And the huge amount of money that was invested into these startups was done with such speed and such appetite to grow these startups very quickly that often very few of the startups were really sustainable or even viable at all as businesses. They looked attractive. It seemed like they had a good product. It seemed like they had a great team, but for many reasons, they couldn't actually go the distance. And many of these startups failed very fast. And the boom, of course, became a bust. Now, there were many lessons learned. Startups did not disappear, nor did the sort of startup method of building a company, that did not disappear. In fact, it came back stronger than ever. But it did give us many, many warning signs that we can go back and learn from even today. So by the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, the startup landscape has become pretty much global, right? There are startups all over the place. They're in Asia, they're in Africa, they're in Europe, certainly all over North and South America. This kind of mentality of starting a company from scratch and being able to build it into a global powerhouse is beginning to take hold. There are many examples that are starting to kind of catch people's eye, and they're getting the bug that, oh, wow, maybe I can really make something that's bigger than what I initially thought. And you have a lot of countries that start to emerge as leaders, just as strong leaders as the United States, both in terms of the technology that they're producing and the startups that they're producing. But there's still a lot of different dynamics and different levels of access to resources that exist in various different ecosystems. So Silicon Valley is probably still the most well-known and certainly the most well-funded ecosystem in the world, but that doesn't make it the best. And we can talk more about that later. Are you guys all still with me? Does anyone have any questions?
I have one question. I want to ask you about the words. When we are speaking about the ecosystems, very often we are using the words like ventures. Mm-hmm. And also very often we are using the words, the startups, you see. And from your point of view, what kind of differences between these two terms, startups and ventures? Because now and then, when we are speaking about them, it looks like that this is the same.
They're interchangeable. They're interchangeable. A venture is a, well, in the business context, it's typically a new venture, and a startup is typically a new venture as well. So you can use them interchangeably. The word venture capital, or the combination of words, the term venture capital means capital that is specifically designed to grow a new business. Right, so it's financing for a new business. But
in major part, we are speaking about the innovations and high-tech businesses, right? When we are speaking about the ventures.
Typically.
And
well,
in same time, when we are speaking about the startups, we are also speaking about the high-tech and technology business.
Correct. Usually. Now, many people refer to their own businesses as startups. I will say one thing that's interesting is that, and not talked about very often, but the word startup has no legal weight to it. It is not a legal form of incorporating a business. There's no real, you can't say I have a startup and have that mean, these are my bylaws that say I am a startup, and there's a legal type of structure to it, right? It's not the same as saying I have a corporation, or I have a sole proprietorship, or I have a limited liability corporation, right? So a startup typically has the connotation of a brand new business, one thing, right? A business that is designed to grow fast, that's another thing. Technology, some form of a technology that is going to enable that growth to happen, right? And typically at some point is going to need external financing from either from investors or from some other source. So those are the three main characteristics of a startup. The other issue is that startups are known for is that the growth needs to happen fast, right? That we want to see this kind of scalable expansion very, very quickly. Again, because it's enabled by technology. Okay, so what kinds of positive things can startups contribute with? Because as much hype as we hear about them, as much attention as they get in the press and in Hollywood and all over the world, they are actually a small minority of the overall global business environment, right? The number of companies that are considered startups in the world is a small fraction of the overall number of companies in the world. But they occupy a very large part of our business mentality, let's say, or our outlook on business. And they definitely do contribute many positive things in general to the global business climate. So some of those things, and to the local areas where they are located as well. So some of the ways that they contribute are obviously employment and employability, right? They provide jobs to people, and through those jobs and through the experience of working at the company, people are able to increase their skills, they increase their abilities and their knowledge of specific things, which gives them greater employability as well. So that's when one of the biggest struggles of a startup is actually keeping good talent. This we'll get into later on in the module, but it's important to mention that, building a successful startup means you need to have really great people that work for your startup, and keeping those great people is an essential part of running the business. So it's very, very important to understand the kinds of issues that can come into businesses. As from the standpoint of a mentor or someone who's running an acceleration program, you need to understand and see how the startup teams that are in your program may or may not be building a culture in their business, a business culture for their company that will welcome and maintain and keep good, talented employees. Startups are also really a great way of spreading the entrepreneurial spirit. Many times, a few startups in a city or a small city or a town or a region even can be very inspiring, and sometimes they can do the work of all sorts of business courses and business schools and everything else. They can, just by leading by example and showing that with entrepreneurial talent and support and the will to succeed, and also obviously solid entrepreneurial ideas and budgeting and all the various things that go into planning proper businesses and running proper businesses. That kind of success is a very, or even sometimes failure is still a really great kind of beacon to many people who hadn't necessarily considered opening their own business, but seeing the success of other businesses makes them really want to get out there and start their own. So the spreading of an entrepreneurial spirit throughout a region or a city or a town is a very important thing that startups can do. They change things that the things that we do in our lives, for sure, either by bringing new technology, new solutions, or perhaps by causing us to just look at the way that we're doing things and think to myself, well, maybe there's a better approach to this. How can I make this happen quicker or faster or less expensively? Or how could I make this actually perform better than it is now? What can I do better in solving a problem that I have, or in addressing a need that I may have or that others around me have? Research and development, cheaper research and development. This is a very interesting thing that startups can do, and it's a good way. We'll get into this more later on, but it's a very, very good example of going back to a startup ecosystem or to a business ecosystem, let's say, of how startups can actually help not just their own customers, but or not just the people that are in the startup kind of system, but also larger corporations. Many large corporations will actually try and buy startups if they feel that it's cheaper to buy a company who has already accomplished the research and development of something that's valuable to the large corporation. Okay, so they can actually kind of rather than expending a lot of resources in their own company to develop a new product or to develop a certain part of the product that they want, they can actually buy a startup that has already done that or is already in the process of doing it. So there's definitely a symbiosis that's happening between many companies in the corporate world and many startups as well. You can see this in all sorts of different sectors. So the financial system is a very good example of that, where many large financial organizations are buying smaller startups because they have already developed the technology that they need to go forward with. And there's also a great deal of diffusion of the sort of mentality of innovation, right? That's how startups are by nature trying to innovate on something. They're trying to move forward very fast, and they're trying to come up with a solution that has not been done or has not been done quite as well yet. So this gives a very, very strong push to the idea of innovation as a concept within a community. And they also definitely contribute to this democratization of technology, because if you have a startup that's working on something that is in a sector that has been controlled typically by 2 or 3 sort of monopolistic larger companies, the startup is a much smaller organization. It can move much faster, more agilely, and it can make decisions about providing its technology at a cheaper rate, for instance, or in a more accessible way. So it can actually sort of democratize the technology or the business climate in a certain sector. Moving into the question of acceleration programs and how do we kind of develop startup ecosystems as a method. We can talk about acceleration programs that we see now. There are many, many, many all over the world, thousands and thousands, but it all kind of started with one particular acceleration program based in Silicon Valley called Y Combinator that began in 2005. Now, Y Combinator started out as a small group of people who wanted to accelerate the development of startup companies. And by accelerate, they meant either get them going as fast as possible so that they would succeed or fail. The reasoning behind that is that if you're going to succeed quickly, you're much more likely to continue on that trajectory. If you fail fast, you've expended a little bit of time and a little bit of resources, but you haven't gone a very, very, very long time and expended a lot of time and a lot of resources. So it's the cheapest way to fail. So Y Combinator began what they called an equity financing mode for their acceleration program. They assembled a large group of their network. There were a few people in the very beginning. Paul Graham and his wife were two of the first founders of Y Combinator, and they had a couple of their business associates and friends and academics that came on board as mentors and also had a stake. They were shareholders in Y Combinator. And Y Combinator started what they call equity financing, where they would bring startup teams in, and in exchange for a small amount of equity from the startups, meaning the startups would give them a small ownership stake in their company, they would provide them with mentorship, a small amount of funding, and a great deal of pressurized hard work for 3 months. At the end of that time, there would be a demonstration day where the startups would showcase what they had done, what their product was, and so forth. And they would do that in front of an audience of venture capitalists who could, if they wished to, invest in the startup teams. Now, Y Combinator already had a stake in those startup teams, right? So they definitely, it was in their best interest for the value of those startup teams to improve in the course of their acceleration program. And thus, the 10% stake that they have in company X, let's say, right, that is worth perhaps $100,000 when the company enters the program. Once the company finishes the program, if the valuation has increased because of the work that they've done in the program, then the 10%, which Y Combinator owns, that was worth 100,000, is maybe now worth 200,000. If a venture capitalist decides to invest in the company, then the value of the company, and hence the accelerator's share of the company, is also going to increase. So the idea is that they have a small stake in very, very, very early stage companies. They help build these companies. They help build the value of these companies. And that small stake is then worth much more money. And they build a portfolio. Now, Y Combinator was very, very good. They still are very, very good at what they do. And they were able to accept the creme de la creme of startups. They are still known as perhaps the most famous acceleration program in the world. There are, of the thousands that are out there, acceleration programs, there's about 200 that are very, very well known. Of those 200, there's probably 50 that are super, super successful and extremely competitive. But that doesn't mean that even small acceleration programs or that are operating in small areas or rural areas or any place else, it doesn't mean that they can't be successful, and it doesn't mean that they're not doing very, very important work. Overall, there's been approximately $90 billion invested by startups, in startups, sorry, via accelerators. So what that means is that the number of startups that have come out of accelerators over the last about 15 years or so have managed to raise something like $90 billion total worldwide. That figure, however, may be on the small side because that's just based on what's been reported, and we don't know. There's many other times when startups have had angel investment that hasn't been reported and so forth. So the 90 billion is a conservative estimate. Something like 60% of acceleration programs that are run worldwide use the equity model, just like Y Combinator, which means that they take a small ownership stake in the company again. But so that leaves the remaining 40% that don't. And that typically those 40%, they're either going to work on a basis of charging participants to participate in their, charging startup teams to participate in their program. Some of them are publicly funded. There's various different ways to finance the program. Now, as we said, acceleration is a process of grow fast or fail fast. And there's very much of a Darwinian context to this to this mentality, this organizing principle behind accelerators. The idea being that you want to start with the best that you can get, but you know that there is a tremendous amount of pressure that's going to be applied on these startups, and they're going to be asked to test themselves quite strongly. So not all of them are going to finish the program. Not all startups are going to succeed, even the ones that do finish the program. The overall success rate of startups typically is something like 3% in terms of long-term lasting success. So the Darwinian idea of this, survival of the fittest starts out from the very beginning of the acceleration process, in the sense that some business ideas are not going to withstand the test of the market, the test of a financial model, the test of technology, many different tests that they will encounter both in the acceleration program, but also especially in the business world, in the actual real world of trying to build the company and build the product. Those are tests that are going to be repeated over and over and over again, and many startups don't survive those tests. They can't. So when we begin an acceleration project, it's important to start with the best that we can, as far as we see them, the best material that we can, because that's going to give us the best chance of overall success, both for the program and for the teams themselves. Now, the program itself, the acceleration program itself, is going to involve a great deal of support and a great deal of pushing from the organizers, because we need to help these teams with things like verifying their market needs, right? Understanding what kinds of proprietary technology they need to build. What is their intellectual property? How do they handle that? Should they patent? Should they not? Sorry. Creating their business plan, running realistic financial forecasts, understanding, getting feedback from them, from their customers, from the market, estimating what kind of sales they may be able to have based on the feedback that they get, based on the effectiveness of their solution, based on their competitors, and understanding the competitive landscape that's out there. All of these kinds of exercises and tests are put to startups when they're in an acceleration program. And this is done on purpose in a very short period of time. The typical cycle for an acceleration program is 3 months. And the idea being, again, as we said, fail fast or succeed fast, right? Because after you get through that process, you want to be able to either keep building or move on to something else. Okay, so it's a fraction of just a fraction of the lifetime of a business, 3 months, where you are able to really see the potential of that business to grow or not to grow. Okay, the kinds of parameters that we look at when we're bringing startup teams into our program, into an acceleration program, are typically designed around the following factors here, and you can read them all on the screen here. The top two have to do with the team. This is very, very, very crucial. It is the absolute most important part of a startup, because a top-notch team can do a lot of great things, even with not the greatest technology or not the greatest market. But a team that is maybe not quite dedicated enough, maybe doesn't have the right skill set, maybe not super happy to all be working together, that kind of a team, even with the greatest idea in the world, the greatest product in the world, the greatest opportunity in the world, those kinds of teams typically can't go the distance. So when you're looking at beginning an acceleration program and designing the criteria for admission, we like to put a lot of emphasis on the team. How complete is it, right? Many times, especially in early stage ecosystems, we will get teams of one. Teams of one are admirable because you have to admire the founder's desire and ability to take the risk of starting a business. On the other hand, they're also very difficult because one person almost never can do everything that's needed to get the business off the ground and run when you're talking about a startup. Typically, they don't have all of the skills technologically, business-wise, human resources-wise, organizationally, and so forth, or the experience to be just one person and wear all the hats that are necessary. So we look for a complete team that can be, sometimes it's only 2 people, many times it's 3, sometimes it's 4. The opposite of the single founder difficulty is a large team in the very, very beginning. And the reason that very large teams, for instance, 6 or 7 people who come in as a team, the reason that that's hard is that unless you have the majority, well, not the majority, but let's say 3 of the 6 people are technical co-founders. If everybody has their own individual job, oftentimes you will have a little bit of a difference of opinion about where the startup needs to go, or how do we manage our limited resources. So when you have a large team, you need to be very, very sure that everybody on that team is dedicated to the same end goal. Again, when we're looking at the requirements for the admission of a team, we're going to ask them several questions. And so those questions need to be designed to find out as much as you can about the team itself. How complete is the team? Do they have everybody there that they need? Of everybody that's there, are they all dedicated to the same goal, and so forth? And the location. Now, the location of the team used to be a really big deal because acceleration programs were run live in person. As we know now, the location of the team is not necessarily a deal breaker, right? We can have remote teams that work together super great. They can be very effective. They can be absolutely on the nose with everything that they're doing and be spread out all over the world. On the other hand, direct in-person contact and the osmosis that comes with that is very, very important. So it's desirable if the team members are able to attend the program in person. Incorporation is a very tricky question, and depending on the kind of acceleration program you're running, you may or may not want to have that as a factor, meaning that the startup team may need to be incorporated as a business or may not. That should be decided based upon the conditions within your local area that you're starting the acceleration program on. Which technology sector are they operating in? Some acceleration programs have what we call a vertical focus. So they may deal only in one particular type of technology, let's say mobile technology, right? Or financial technology. Maybe it's a fintech accelerator, and they only want startups that are dealing with fintech solutions, okay? Many other accelerators are generalist. That has to do with with the kind of resources that you have. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, and how you can maximize those resources to the startup's benefit. So if you're going to have an acceleration program that is devoted to one vertical sector, like financials, let's say fintech, correct? You want to make sure that you have enough industry expertise that's available to the startups to help them prove their solutions. How ready they are with their prototype and how ready they are with their business plan is also a deciding factor. When you're starting an acceleration program, it's important to be able to have the right kind of help for the stage that the startup is at. So if you're going to have several startups that are all at different levels of readiness in terms of their prototype, you need to be sure that you have the resources, again, as I said, to assist all those levels. Most acceleration programs ask for a prototype to be finished. They also typically ask for the beginnings of a business plan. Now, this is going to be one of the biggest parts of the program itself, which is helping them fine-tune their business plan. But you definitely want to see some kind of a business plan that they've begun on their own. And finally, what kind of an innovation are they offering? What kind of an innovation does their solution provide to the market? What kind of disruption is possible based on their solution? Okay, those are different parameters that you can design into the admission process for your accelerator. And again, there is no hard and fast rule that all of these things need to be at this X level. Designing an acceleration program needs to be designed with the local community in mind, or whoever the community that you're going to be pulling your startups from in mind. What are the needs of that community? What are the needs of those kinds of startups? And how do you as an acceleration program meet those needs? It's very important. So if you want to run a fintech accelerator, for instance, but you don't have the network of financial expertise, and there's also not a lot of desire on the part of startups around you to build fintech solutions, then it's probably not the right kind of accelerator to run. I'm going to, let's see, it's 7:53 here. I'm going to stop right here and we'll pick it up when we come back. I want to let's take a 7-minute break here. It's 5:53. So we'll come back just after 6 o'clock. Give everybody a chance to just stretch your legs real fast, get some water or coffee, and think of any questions you have. I'll check the chat as well. And we can answer some questions, and then we'll finish up with the next few slides, and I'll set you up for tomorrow as well. Okay, so let's take a quick break.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, you too. It's very interesting.
Good, I'm glad.
Thanks. See you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Hello. Hi.
Just so everybody knows, the recording is still on. I think everybody's muted or left.
Yeah, absolutely. Just keep in mind the people in the waiting room.
Right.
Okay. Switching to Hangout for a second if you like.
So we're just, in case anybody's just entered, we're taking a quick break. We'll be back in about 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes.
Andrea, sorry, I have one question.
Sure.
I couldn't find the videos. I found a lot of texts on the page, but I couldn't find the videos. Can you show please where to
Thank
find?
you for bringing that up. Yeah, I'll thank you very much. I'll address that in a few minutes. Okay, when we all come back, I'll address it.
I can give a link for that.
Put it in the chat, please.
So I have uploaded the link regarding where the videos are. They are cascaded under the title text courses. Okay, so under the content tab, you press the content tab, you scroll a little down, you find the text courses, and then you find a title for each module. If you click on the title, you'll have 2 video entries. I hope that explains the mystery.
Okay, are we all back?
Yes, just a second.
Not quite yet. Everybody has coffee. See a couple of faces.
I want to save this this link for in my computer.
In the chat, Argyri has posted the links to the videos that are not up on the, they're on the site, but not quite in the same place that we wanted them to be. So you can get them, access them directly from the link that he sent in the chat, the videos. And we're working with the IT team for on the Smart Cafe site to make sure that everything is moved into the places it's supposed to be. So that will be fixed this week for sure for all the modules. So, okay, one of you had, just a second. I'm gonna come back.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I have two questions, okay? One question is, you told that when we are discussing the business ecosystems, it means that the fast growing of the company in process of the acceleration, right?
Correct.
And from my point of view, at the same time, it means that our share, business owners' share, is decreasing very fast also.
Well, the decrease.
And how we can protect the share of the owner of the business.
That's a very good question.
This is the first question. The second question I want to ask you about the definition of the entrepreneurial economic system. What is the major factors when we are speaking about the description of this terminology? This is a combination, but also I think this is a concentration also, because in process of the ecosystems, in industrial parks, in research and development consortia, in incubators, we have the concentration of the finance, concentration of the human resource, intellectual resources, equipment, and so on. And so on. We make the concentration everything. Therefore, we call them the parks. Is it correct? I'm speaking correct, or maybe something wrong is in my definitions.
No, you're talking, I think you're referring sort of to an entrepreneur, an innovation or a tech park.
Yes.
Right. Well, you can, I mean, that's a very typical sort of let's say containment, what's contained in those, or what is theoretically should be contained in those entities, let's say the technological parks or innovation zones and so forth. But it's kind of like saying, you know, what do we put in a national park, right? Or what do we put in a zoological park, right? There's the idea behind an entrepreneurial innovation zone or an entrepreneurial park of some kind is that you do, as you said, you want to concentrate as many resources as possible, both in order to foster entrepreneurial success. And those resources are going to be, like you said, intellectual capital, you know, access to financial capital, certain kinds of resources such as infrastructure for building prototypes and testing prototypes and so forth. Those are all very, very important aspects of an innovation zone or a technological park or so forth. But it depends on who's putting it together, because that's, you know, both what they are able to put inside and what they wish to put inside. As far as your first question about your ownership stake in the company, we'll go a lot deeper into that later on in this module and several other modules.
I'm sorry, I need to open the door just a second, please. I'm sorry.
So we'll touch on that question. We'll deal much much deeper answer later on in the module.
Yes,
So,
sorry.
That's okay. I just said we will touch on, we'll go much deeper into the issue of ownership, and it's called dilution when owners have less of a stake in their own company. And we'll talk quite in detail about that later on in the module. So we'll come back around to your question in a couple of
we will speak later.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So as we said, and somebody posted in the chat just a comment about the team when we were talking about the admission parameters. I think it was Natalia. You said that people having the same interest, not only the same goal. That's very true. It's important.
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's because it's fundamentally important. We need people with us who have not only the same goal but also the same interests. Yeah,
correct.
To be the team.
Absolutely, and it's interesting how sometimes in the beginning people feel that they do have the same interests and the same goals, and the acceleration process often will expose the differences of opinion, let's say, on what those same interests are. So startups in an acceleration program can fail for reasons other than business plan or technology or so forth. They can often fail because the founders themselves on the team realize that it's not what they thought it was going to be. That working together in such a high pressure and demanding kind of process and environment is not what they expected it to be. And again, that's also an example of failing fast, because if you have a team that has difficulties, the chances that those difficulties will go away as the business grows and matures are actually less likely. It's more likely that the difficulties within the founding team will be amplified and become even more acute as the business grows and changes, because things will get harder and harder and harder. So it's important from an organizer standpoint, from the viewpoint of those of you who are running the acceleration program, it's really important to be on the lookout for issues within the team as they may come up during the course of the program. So the cost parameters, because we have to, if we're going to set up an acceleration program, right, we have to finance it somehow. We have to be able to support it. The cost parameters are variable. There's as many different ways to run an acceleration program as there are to run businesses. And those parameters are going to vary based on both the startups who are there, who are receiving the acceleration services, as well as those who are providing those acceleration services. So typically the cost of implementing the program is going to depend on the benefits that it provides, right? And those benefits can come in many different forms. Okay, typically they're going to come in advising and mentoring, for sure. They can also come, and benefits can be in terms of tools, right, that are provided, whether they're software packages or let's say 3D printing kind of capabilities. Any sort of a tool that is provided to the startup companies that are in the program is going to have a cost associated with it. There are also services. Many acceleration programs offer services that are part of the program, but that are provided by professionals. So those services can range from legal advising to accountancy matters, to IP matters. For instance, someone who's an IP specialist or a patent specialist can give advice on whether or not to file a patent and how the patent process works. All of those services can be provided either on a pro bono basis by the professionals who are offering them, or they can be paid. The accelerator can pay these as consultants, these professionals, to come in and give their services, provide their services to the startups. So all of the benefits that are offered have some kind of a cost associated with them. And depending on the budget that you have as an acceleration program, you have to decide whether you can afford to offer those benefits, offer those services or not. Many companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft, many of the largest tech companies, Apple and so forth, have dedicated programs for acceleration services that they actually will provide things like, cloud hosting, certain kinds of consultancies and so forth for acceleration programs that are associated with their company. So for instance, Amazon Web Services has a whole big Amazon for Startups office that their entire job is just to provide Amazon Web Services to acceleration programs in the hopes of getting lots of startups to build products that are based on AWS technology. The same is true for Google, for Apple, for Microsoft, and so forth. So many times as an acceleration program, you can actually go to those large companies and apply to be associated with them, apply to their partner programs, and then take advantage of those benefits, which you then pass on to the startups in your program. Some acceleration programs charge fees, as I mentioned earlier. There is a very, very famous global startup acceleration program called the Founders Institute that charges a fee for its startups. Typically, it's around $700 per startup. And they also ask for 4% equity in the form of what we call a warrant, which means that the startup doesn't actually give the equity, but it promises to give it later on, if and when the program asks for it. So the Founders Institute, just a quick description of them, and we'll get into more descriptions of programs. They charge money and an ownership stake in the company, which they then goes into a common global, let's say, pool of equity, and they have several other criteria that they ask for from their startups, but they're also very, very well received, well regarded, and very known as being quite successful. And they're very, very community based as well. Equity-based accelerators, including what I just mentioned, the Founders Institute, but many more sort of sole equity-based models, such as Y Combinator and so forth, are looking for what we call an exit from their startups, right? They want the stake in the company that they have, whether it's 5% or 10% or 20%, whatever the equity stake that they have in all of their startup companies, they want that to grow so that they can sell their shares later on. They can exit from the company later on at a profit, meaning the 100,000 that I invested in you, or the 100,000 that my stake was valued at in 2020 will grow to 500,000 in 2025 when I exit. So I've increased the value of my investment, the investment of the acceleration services that I provided. I've increased that value 5 times. Okay, that's the idea behind equity-based based accelerators, is that they build a portfolio of companies which they can then exit out of and continue to make money to run their acceleration program. So different kinds of categories, as I mentioned a minute ago, we can group them into three models here. One is the investor-led accelerators. Okay, these are typically supported by investors, meaning they're VC funds or shareholders or stakeholders. Okay, and examples of this, as I said, are Y Combinator. They have their own investment angle. Techstars is a very famous, well-known global acceleration program. 500 Startups is another one. Startup Bootcamp, ProSiebenSat. and Axel Springer Plug and Play. There's many of these investor-led accelerators where the money to run the program, as I mentioned before, comes from the value of the portfolio itself and selling those shares. But it's also because they have a venture capital fund behind the program that they can afford to host really high quality startups, and that they can afford sometimes to invest in those startups at the beginning of the acceleration program, not at the end. Another kind of accelerator comes from what we call matchmakers, where the focus of the program is on, is actually sort of dictated by a host company, let's say. It can be a large corporation, it can be even a public entity in a way, some entity that is trying to solve a certain type of problem or address certain kinds of needs. And they want to do that by being matched with certain startups that will each address those needs or those problems in a specific way. So Microsoft Ventures is a good example of that. Amazon also has its own venture accelerator that is built only for their product Alexa, right? You all know what Alexa is. It's a smart speaker that's in, that you have it in your home and you can ask it to do things like turn on your lights or play certain music or so forth. So that's a good example of a matchmaking accelerator where a large company, in this case Amazon, is accelerating startups that are building technology specifically to go with their product Alexa. And finally, we have ecosystem accelerators, okay, where they focus more on developing the overall entrepreneurial ecosystem and innovation and so forth. Climate Kick is a good one. Bethnal Green Ventures is another one. There's all sorts of ecosystem accelerators, and depending on if they are already located in one particular sort of startup innovation zone or innovation ecosystem, like fintech. Again, I keep coming back to that, but it's a good example that we should all be fairly familiar with. They're going to really try and bring in startups that are working within that sector, but that are also going to push the boundaries of that sector a little bit and help to enrich the ecosystem around it. Now, many times acceleration programs will offer the possibility of funding their startups, but typically that happens at when we're talking about early stage or growth stage startups. When you have an idea stage startup, or what we call a PowerPoint startup, right? This is where the team has a great idea to solve a problem or address a need, but they haven't been able to build the prototype yet. And they don't have any actual factual feedback from the market, meaning they haven't tested their solution with users or customers. And so they don't have any real fact-based indication of success, okay? So at the idea stage, it's very, very difficult to get for an accelerator to actually fund those kinds of startups, right? Meaning they will offer money in the beginning. The same thing is true for venture capitalists or other sources of finance. It's very difficult when all you have is a PowerPoint presentation or a great set of slides about your idea. It's very difficult to find the capital that you need to actually build that. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. When you're in the early stage and you do have a prototype and you do have some basic evidence of market acceptance, or at least some very solid feedback from the market, then it gets much more probable that you can receive funding. And obviously, if you're a startup that's in the growth phase, where you have established customers, you have a clear opening in the market where you've managed to prove that your product has a chance to grow and evolve, then it's much more probable that you will receive funding. In a vertical accelerator, that's the one exception, or to idea stage startups where you have a very strong focus and you have founders who are already very, very experienced within that vertical sector, then those kinds of accelerators will often fund idea stage startups. And obviously, early stage startups and growth stage are much, much more higher possibilities. Now, if you have a sector agnostic program, by sector agnostic, we mean there's no particular focus of the accelerator. There's no special technology or network that the accelerator is providing that has to do with one particular sector, meaning we'll take everybody, right? We take a travel startup and a finance startup and a fitness startup and a cooking startup and a let's say you know, an enterprise, a startup for large corporations. We'll take them all, right? Startups that are working on solutions for all of these different kinds of sectors and products, right? At that point, if the Startup Acceleration Program has money to give, then yes, they will fund idea stage companies. Yes, it's appropriate for the acceleration program to fund idea stage companies. However, those types of programs and that kind of funding typically comes not from a venture capital fund, but from a private finance source, but it will often come from public grants or public money, where the government realizes that in order to boost the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the area, that they need to inject some money into the system itself. And one of the best ways to inject that money into the local ecosystem is through an acceleration program. So in that case, yes, it's possible that an acceleration program will say, okay, all you teams can come in and we will give each one of you 5,000 euros stipend to help, you know, do your market research or build your prototype or write your patent application, those kinds of things. At that point, yes, in fact, it does definitely, it is appropriate to fund idea stage startups. So what are some of the main benefits for the program participants, other than funding if they get it, but depending on what level you're at, you may not have any funding. The biggest benefit, obviously, is going to be the improvement of their entrepreneurial capacity, right? And this is going to be something which has a spillover effect, because typically by improving the capacity of the entrepreneurs, their abilities to see more clearly market needs, to understand how to identify their customers, what their customers are really asking for, how to match their product to overall trends in the market, how to really identify new business opportunities in the market. All of those kinds of entrepreneurial skills are going to be tested and pushed and hopefully increased by going through an acceleration program. That's what you're looking for, is to really boost that entrepreneurial capacity of the founders, so that will help them in their current business, in their existing business, but also if they choose to go on and open more businesses. And it's something that they will pass on to the other members of their team, to their employees, and so forth. Another benefit is the reduction of various different kinds of transaction costs. So for instance, if they're getting assistance in the form of, like I said before, Amazon Web Service Credit, or, you know, Google for Startups or anything like that, that will take down some of the costs, the initial costs of running the business. And that can be a very important boost when you're in the really early stages. As I've mentioned several times before, helping you fail faster, because failing fast means less resources are expended on something that ultimately is not going to succeed, right? Or obviously, the converse is proceeding faster, moving forward with your idea, getting the feedback that you need much faster. And often the questioning and the mentoring that happens within the acceleration program is enough to really push through the barriers that were holding a startup back to achieving its very first indication fit in the market. And finally, we can leverage the networks of not just the mentors and the program organizers, the acceleration program itself, not just the network that they provide, which is vital to a good acceleration program, but also leveraging the networks of the individual startup founders. That's very important because they all come with their own external networks, their own groups of people, of colleagues, of friends, of interested parties who may in fact be of benefit to other teams in the startup program too. One of the unfortunate characteristics of many early stage startup ecosystems is suspicion. And suspicion is rampant in many, many communities, many startup communities that I've seen around the world. There is a tendency to be worried that if you express your idea or your solution or tell too much about your startup, that someone will steal it and run with it. They'll like your idea or your solution so much that they'll take it and try and do it themselves. And the suspicion that entails means that people don't often communicate as well amongst each other as individual teams, one to another. So they miss out on the opportunity for a lot of extra creative thinking that can help them solve their problems. And so when you're running an acceleration program, one of the biggest hurdles in the beginning is often just breaking down the suspicion amongst different teams. And you need to be able to foster an environment where people feel free and confident to express their doubts, their questions, as well as their encouragement and their ideas of other teams, because that is what makes a much richer program. And that is where you have the kind of osmosis that will contribute to a greater success rate across the board. So the networking where people feel free to share their own personal resources, oh, my uncle's a patent attorney, maybe he can help you with this, or, oh, my best friend already has a supply company that could really, use your product. Maybe I should set you up together. Those kinds of networking connections that can happen when there's an environment of trust are very, very important, and they contribute to an overall success that you can get once you put those things together. So I think I'm going to stop right here, and we will pick up tomorrow with what works and what doesn't when it comes to planning with entrepreneurs in the early stages. I'm going to stop my screen share here and see anybody has any questions. And Natalia has put something in the chat here, just a moment. We can say it's one important part of education from each other. Exactly, yes. I think that this bridges, as you mentioned, building bridges between each other and helping to educate one another is a really, really important part of the process. And we've seen this happen many, many times in many different acceleration programs that we've run that are start out, everyone's a little hesitant, they're not sure how much they want to say, and by the end people are really helping each other out, and they've formed a community, and the community will be there to support each other when the times get tough, as well as celebrate things that happen. It's a very, very important part of running an acceleration program. That's probably the best overall and long-term impact that you can have, other than building individual strong businesses, is building the bridges and the ties between those founders so that they can, again, push that network effect out even further. So I'll see, just last chance if anyone has questions. Again, I don't know if all of you heard earlier, Argiri has posted the link to the videos here in the chat. Our apologies for the site not having exactly the right information in exactly the right place. We're working with the IT team right now to get that all straightened out. So by the end of the week, everything will be where it's supposed to be. But feel free to post your questions and get in touch. Otherwise, save them for tomorrow. I will start out tomorrow with a couple of brief videos, just real fast, but please feel free to bring questions. It would be great if we had some interaction as well tomorrow. Okay. And like I said, it'll be a long session tomorrow, so make sure that you've got a pot of coffee, and we will take a few breaks, but we'll be in it for a full 3 hours tomorrow. Okay. Great.
I want to ask you about the videos. You can say, can now and then we use the videos because now and then we have the same time I have the classes also in the university. And is it possible to
use the videos in session?
When I cannot participate in your lesson, I will see the videos. Is it possible to this format of the participation?
Yes, I would refer you to Ms. Simciuc, to Ms. Elena, to ask her specifically what are the rules regarding when you can watch them and how many times you can substitute. So I would say if you send her just a quick message, she'll be able to clarify all of that for you. But we do have the videos exactly for that reason. It's important for everybody to be able to go back and access the content, that not just for the videos that have been pre-recorded, but for the group sessions. So, and once again, that's a nice thing about technology. You know, we can go back and check things later.
Thank you.
So. Okay, well, everybody have a great evening. Thank you very much for sticking with us, for your time and your comments and your energy. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Great.
Very interesting.
Thank you. These great questions.
Thank you.
You might need to take the last picture before everybody leaves.
Oh yes, sorry guys.
But it's okay. We can have that also as a snapshot from the video. It's the same thing.
True. Hold on. Don't go away. Don't go away.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We can have the video. People left already.
Okay, never mind. You can all go. Have a good night, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.